Hey, thanks for tuning in this week. I want to take you to Mark chapter 5. Today we're going to look at Jesus healing a sick woman who'd been sick for 12 years. And then another scenario where Jesus heals a 12-year-old girl. Actually raises the 12-year-old girl from the dead at the very end of our text. So let me read this to you. Mark 5, verse 21 through 43 says this. Now when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him. So no surprise, no secret, anywhere that Jesus went. At this time, there was a huge gathering that followed him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed and she will live. So Jesus went with him, and the great multitude followed him and thronged him. So really just kind of squished him in there in a circle. It was this really gathering that was tightly squeezed together. Verse 25, now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years. She's hemorrhaging. She has internal bleeding. She had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment, for she said, If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. Key there is immediately. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, Who touched my clothes? Okay, so just imagine this for a minute. Jesus and the disciples, they're on their way really to Jairus' house, and the crowds have gathered in together. They're in close quarters. They're squishing each other. They're definitely invading each other's bubble. There is just no room. Jesus is not being touched at this moment, and he stops in the middle of it and he said, Who just touched me? I can kind of picture the disciples kind of think that Jesus has gone a little loony. And of course you've been touched. Verse 32, and he looked around to see her who had done this thing, but the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, Daughter, a term of affection, Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. While he was still speaking, some came from the ruler. Don't forget about Jairus. Some came to the ruler from his house who said, Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? I'm going to come back to that. As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, Do not be afraid, only believe. And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult and those who wept and wailed loudly. And when he came in, he said to them, Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping. Again, they probably think that Jesus is a little loony at the moment. After they ridiculed him, when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him and entered where the child was lying. And he took the child by the hand and said to her, Talitha cumi, which is translated, little girl, I say to you, rise. Immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age. And they were overcome with great amazement, but he commanded them strictly that no one should know it, and said that something should be given her to eat. So let's go back up to verse 25. Talk about this woman. There was a certain woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years. She had suffered many things from many physicians. She spent all her money. She wasn't better, she grew worse. And she heard about Jesus. She came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I only may touch his clothes, I may be well. We don't know much about this woman except that she suffered from internal bleeding for the previous 12 years. Can't imagine. No doctor could provide answers. The sickness cost her emotionally. The scripture tells us that it cost her everything that she had. It cost her emotionally, it cost her physically, it cost her socially, it cost her financially. Emotionally, because there were just no answers. There were no solutions. There weren't even suggestions that we know about. Physically, because her health kept getting worse. Not even staying the same, not even maintaining, definitely going downhill. I want to just remind you, the parallel of this is that your spiritual health either moves forward or it moves backward. You don't remain the same. Spiritual stagnation is actually spiritual reversal. If you're not moving closer to Jesus, you're moving further away from Jesus. And so her health kept getting worse. Socially, it caused her everything socially because her internal bleeding made her ceremonial unclean. You can read Leviticus and find out all the reasons why she was ceremonial unclean. But this uncleanness meant she couldn't go to the temple. She couldn't touch another person. She was excluded from social gatherings. Really, truly, it isolated her on every possible level. She was spent in every direction possible. Verse 26 tells us that she spent all of her money. She exhausted her finances trying to look for the cure. She was sick. She was broke. She was full of shame. She felt no value. She was isolated. And she was at her last resort. There are two things for certain that she knew for sure. Approaching Jesus would be a risk. She could be ridiculed for making others unclean just by being in the area, ruining the lives of other people. It was a risk approaching Jesus. She was also certain that Jesus did for others what could not be done by physicians for so many people. Jesus did for others what physicians could not do for so many people. And she knew that if there was any chance, out of desperation, she had to try. Her desperation birthed faith and trust in Jesus. Her faith allowed the healing she sought for 12 years. I want to encourage you today as you watch this, not to get to the point that she was at physically, but don't get to that point spiritually where your only reason for approaching Jesus is desperation. You should approach Jesus because He is good and just, and he loves you, and he cares for you, and he has such good things, such good promises for you that he would love to offer to you out of love and to be called one of his children. We'll see that a little later where Jesus refers to her as daughter. Desperation birthed faith and trust. Faith and trust birthed a childship with the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the creator of the world. But I want you to get this, okay? Get this. Jesus was the answer that she had looked for in every other place and never found it. And so maybe you're looking for peace. Maybe you're looking for hope. Maybe you're looking for a sustainable energy. Maybe you're looking just for life. Maybe you're looking for a purpose. Maybe you want to know why you are on the earth, and it has to be more than just what you're currently doing. And so you just keep looking for the answers. And I want to say to you, Jesus is the answer that you're looking for in all the wrong places. Just like the woman that we don't even know her name, but she was looking for the answers and the solutions, the suggestions in all the wrong places. According to Jewish law, when the woman touched Jesus, he should have become unclean. In verse 33, she was fearful because she knew what truly happened with that touch. That touch that was supposed to make Jesus unclean didn't make Jesus unclean at all. Rather, turned the unclean woman into a clean, whole person. The powerful change was instant. Scripture tells us that it was immediate. Immediately, the fountain of her blood was dried up, verse 29, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. Verse 30, and Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him. The transfer of power, the transfer of cleanness was instant. She experienced all that Jesus had for her in that very moment. Jesus didn't hold back at all, and I want to say to you, Jesus isn't holding back on you either. When we don't experience all that Jesus has for us in the moment that we're currently living in, it's because we don't have enough faith and trust. We're holding back. We're looking for answers in the wrong places. It's something that we are doing to create a gap and to create a drift in our lives versus and we love to blame God that he's the one that's holding back when it's really just us. Sometimes we need to trust the healing power of Jesus. No more. You might not be able to feel it right now, but you need to trust it because it's true, and there are centuries of evidence that support that it's true. Sometimes that we need to remember that Jesus is going to make us clean, and it's impossible to ever make Jesus unclean. When we experience the healing power of Jesus in our lives, we don't need to be scared. Our faith makes us well. Just as the woman had to step out and approach Jesus, we must also approach Jesus for the healing we desperately look for in all the wrong places. Okay, our story started with a ruler of the synagogue named Jairus. So the sick woman that's been bleeding for 12 years is kind of a side story, and And it starts with Jairus and it ends with Jairus. That's the bookend of this passage. And so I want to go back to Jairus, who had really just, they're on his way to his house to heal his daughter. And I kind of just see he's waiting for Jesus to finish with this sick woman so very patiently. It's possible his request was interrupted by her. It's possible he became irritated by her. And it's possible that he felt his need was greater than her need. It's not true in our own lives. We're like, I want God to do this for me instead of doing something for somebody else, because I think that I think that what I want God to do for me is more important than what maybe God needs to do for you in the moment. And we live that way because we're selfish people. And so it's possible that Jairus thought that his need, he's like counting time, my daughter's so sick. If desperation is a theme in this chapter, he went to Jesus as a ruler of the synagogue because he was desperate. And he may not have thought he had much time left. He's like, let's go, let's get on it, Jesus. We need to go take care of my daughter. This sick woman has been sick forever, but come save my daughter. In verse 35, there are some people that came from his house. Verse 35, while he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? I have two thoughts on that statement right there. The first one is this. Did Jairus think Jesus had limitations? Did those with him believe Jesus had limitations? Your daughter's dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? His limitations have been reached. Your daughter has died. He can't help you anymore. He's Jesus and he's helped so many people, but your situation is beyond what Jesus can do for you. And I want to say, as we're going to see the story, that whole line of thinking that I'm kind of reading into the text is a lie from Satan. So my second thought is do you ever think you're too far gone for Jesus to bring healing into your situation? You ever think you're just too far gone? So every year I speak at a camp and I talk to ninth graders, and every year for the past 15 or so years, I've talked to ninth grader after ninth grader after ninth grader. They're 14, 13, 14, 15. Every year I talk to them and they say, I think that I have too much sin in my life to get right with God. I wonder if God really loves me anymore because I have so much sin in my life. If you're that person, if you think that you're too far gone, you have too much sin, you've done too many bad things for Jesus to bring healing into your situation, Luke 5 is proof that Jesus can bring healing into any situation that you might bring to him. So let's look at the rest of what this says. Verse 36. As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not be afraid, only believe. The phrase could also be said as don't be afraid, keep believing. Keep believing that Jesus can do what you requested in the first place. Don't give up. Keep your faith moving. Keep your belief moving. Keep it going. Keep it going. Keep it going. So they have a little conversation, and Jesus, they finally get to his house. And verse 40 says that he went in, Jesus went in after he was laughed at. He put everyone outside. He took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him. So he went in the house to see this little girl that's 12 years old with the mom, the dad, Peter, James, and John. There's 6 people in the room plus the little girl. And he speaks life into what is dead. And he speaks life into what is dead, and immediately the girl arose and walked. And they were overcome with great amazement. So I want to say this to you as well. If you are spiritually dead, Jesus desires to speak life into your life. If you're discouraged, if you struggle with depression, if you just feel a hopelessness, a tiredness, a desire to give up, Jesus would love to speak life into your situation today. But you need to approach him and you need to keep believing. So the question, when we look at this, Jesus knew that he was going to heal this little girl. Jesus isn't surprised by what goes on. So the question could be raised. Why didn't Jesus just heal her in the beginning? At the very first few verses, Jesus said, Jairus comes and says, hey, my daughter's sick. Can you come and heal her so she'll live? Why didn't Jesus just heal her then? He could have at that moment spoken a word and said, I'm going to heal you. I'm going to heal your daughter. She's taken care of right now. Why did he go to the trouble to allow the death? Why did he walk to Jairus' house and endure laughter from those who were mourning this girl's death? So I'm reminded of a similar situation in John chapter 11. Mary and Martha have a brother. His name is Lazarus. They are very close friends of Jesus. Lazarus was sick, and somebody brought word to Jesus. He was in a different town at the time. He brought word to Jesus, and it's like, hey, Lazarus is sick. They need you. And John chapter 11 says that Jesus stayed in the town for 2 more days before going to their home. And while Jesus was not there, Lazarus died. Jesus raised, you go on in John chapter 11, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. And I always think it's possible, it's probable that Mary and Martha's faith increased that day. It's probable that they learned more about Jesus than they previously experienced. And it is probable that Jairus and his friends learned that Jesus was more than a teacher with limitations. The people around at that point would have known Jesus can do miracles and Jesus can heal people, and Jesus just did that with this woman who'd been sick for 12 years with no other solution. Jesus has no limitations, and he showed that in this situation with Jairus' daughter. He also showed that all people are equally important, and that all people have a right to be healed, and that all people are offered the healing grace and the healing power of Jesus Christ. So I want to ask you just a few questions for you to consider. What about us? What about you and me? Are you like the sick woman that only seeks out Jesus when all other options are exhausted? Like you've hit the rock bottom. You're now seeking Jesus out of desperation versus out of a friendship or relationship. Your motivation is desperation versus sonship or daughtership. And in that case, how desperate, if that is you, how desperate do you need to be before Jesus is allowed to provide the answers that you're looking for in all the wrong places? Maybe you're like Jairus. Maybe you're like Jairus and you treat Jesus like someone who has limitations. Maybe you feel like Jesus can't take care of you because Jesus is taking care of somebody else. Or Jesus can go this far with what I need him to do, but there's a line that he can't cross. Maybe like Jairus and his friends, you might think Jesus has limitations. Maybe you think that your life is too far gone for Jesus to bring healing into your life. I think it's very, very specific that Jesus healed someone who they've seen before, and so he's healed a dead person because our sin affects us internally. Our sin kills us internally, and it divides us and it conquers us inside before it might conquer us on the outside. James 1 speaks to that effect, where the internal thoughts and patterns of our lives rot the inside of us before the outside is affected. And even though the outside might not be affected, we still need the healing of Jesus. Dead. If we are not a born-again follower of Jesus Christ, we are dead. And Jesus loves us and cares for us and has our best interest in mind for us and longs sonship or daughtership for us. But faith and trust is required. In both situations that we've read, faith and trust are required. In both situations, immediate healing was offered. Jesus is more than capable. Jesus is more than capable of providing what we are desperately seeking, often in all the wrong places. And I want to ask you today, the bottom underlying question is this: will you keep believing, or will you start believing? And will you allow Jesus Christ to intervene in your life? Hey, if you want to know more about what it means to have a relationship with Jesus Christ, maybe you think you're too far gone, maybe you just need some spiritual help as you watch this, maybe this is spurring some questions on in your life, and you're just looking for some answers. I would love to be able to help you out. You can leave a comment on this video, and let's just start a conversation, and let's see how Jesus can help you in the healing process or the intervention of your life. So, hey, thanks for watching. You are loved.